Jimmy Washington was a bright 13-year-old, well-liked at school, and known for his kind heart. He was the son of Andre Washington, the new chief of police in town. Today, Jimmy was excited. He was visiting his grandmother in the Oakwood neighborhood, a place filled with wonderful memories of his childhood. The scent of cookies always welcomed him, and his grandma's warm hugs made him feel safe. Jimmy took his time walking, enjoying the crisp air and the crunch of leaves under his sneakers. He hummed a tune his grandmother used to sing when he was younger. The streets were quiet and everything seemed calm. But as he turned a corner, he noticed two police officers walking behind him. He didn't pay much attention at first. Oakwood was a safe community, and police patrolling was normal, right? However, after a few moments, Jimmy couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The officers weren't just walking, they were following him. He glanced back briefly, trying to be casual, but his heart skipped a beat when he saw their faces. Officer Grant and Officer Baker weren't just observing. They were staring at him, their eyes hard and unwelcoming. Jimmy's mind raced. What's going on? He thought. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just a kid walking to his grandma's house. He tried to brush it off, telling himself he was overthinking. Yet, their footsteps grew louder, and the officers started closing the distance between them. Jimmy decided to call his dad, Chief Andre Washington. His father had always been clear, if you ever feel unsafe, don't hesitate to call me. Jimmy pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking slightly as he dialed. He could feel his pulse in his ears. It was unusual for him to call his dad during a simple visit to his grandma's, but the situation didn't feel normal. Chief Washington was in the middle of reviewing case files at the precinct when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Jimmy. His heart skipped a beat. Jimmy rarely called him during the day, so this had to be important. "Hey, buddy, what's up?" the chief answered, trying to keep his tone light. Jimmy's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Dad, there are two officers following me. They're acting weird. I don't know what's happening." Immediately, the chief's expression changed. He knew all the officers in his precinct, and he couldn't believe they'd behave this way. But hearing the unease in his son's voice made him drop everything. He grabbed his keys and ran to his car, leaving the station without another word. Back on the street, the officers finally caught up to Jimmy. "Stop right there." Officer Grant's voice was gruff, leaving no room for argument. Jimmy stopped, his heart pounding. He tried to stay calm, remembering everything his father had taught him. "I'm just going to my grandmother's house. It's right up the road," he said politely, but the officers didn't care. They exchanged a quick glance, as if confirming some unspoken suspicion. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Officer Grant demanded. "You don't look like you belong here." Jimmy felt a lump in his throat. What did they mean? He didn't belong. This was his neighborhood too. He had spent countless weekends here, playing in the yard and riding his bike. He tried to explain, but the officers weren't interested in listening. They started asking rapid-fire questions, one after another, barely giving him time to answer. "What's in your pockets?" Officer Grant barked. Jimmy hesitated, feeling violated. He wasn't holding anything dangerous, just a small box with a scarf he had bought for his grandma. He didn't want to hand it over, but before he could say anything, Officer Grant reached into his pocket and pulled it out. "What's this?" he snapped, shaking the box as if it contained something illegal. Jimmy's face turned red with a mix of fear and anger. "It's a gift from my grandmother," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Officer Baker, the younger of the two, looked uncomfortable. He seemed to realize they were going too far but didn't speak up. He glanced at Jimmy with a flicker of sympathy, but it quickly vanished as he followed Officer Grant's lead. Back at the precinct, Chief Washington was driving like never before, weaving through traffic. His mind raced with a mix of anger and fear. He couldn't believe his own officers would treat his son this way. He clenched the steering wheel, praying he would get there in time. Meanwhile, the questioning continued. Jimmy felt trapped, surrounded by the two officers. He tried to explain again. "I'm just visiting my grandmother." "She lives here," he said, pointing down the street, but Officer Grant sneered. "Kids like you shouldn't be wandering around here without a reason," he said harshly. Jimmy swallowed hard. "I told you, sir, I'm not doing anything wrong," he replied, trying to stand his ground despite the fear tightening his chest. Just then, a black car screeched to a stop at the corner. It was Chief Washington. He stepped out, his face a mask of controlled fury. The officers turned, surprised to see their chief. "Chief, sir," Officer Grant stammered, the confidence draining from his face. Chief Washington didn't waste a second. He walked right up to them. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. The officers hesitated. Officer Grant finally muttered, "We thought he was acting suspicious. He didn't look like he belonged." Chief Washington's eyes blazed. "Suspicious? This is my son. He's visiting his grandmother." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You assumed he was a threat without even asking a single question." Officer Baker's face turned pale. "We didn't know, sir," he mumbled. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out," the chief snapped. "Is this how you treat kids in this community? Would you do this to your own children?" Silence hung in the air. Both officers looked down, shame written across their faces. "From now on," Chief Washington continued, his voice commanding, "you will treat every person here with respect. Today, you made a grave mistake." The officers nodded, clearly regretting their actions. Chief Washington put his hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "Let's go, son," he said. As they walked away, Jimmy felt a swell of pride. His father had stood up for him, and the officers had learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions. It wasn't the end of the problem, but it was a start toward making Oakwood a safer, fairer place for everyone. And that's the end of our story. If this story touched you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained and press the bell icon so you never miss more fascinating stories like this one. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.